Good morning. You know, do you want to get provoked to some internal questions? Do you want to get provoked to some reconsideration of what you might have previously believed to be true about God, about yourself, about your friends? Grab the book of Job, pick it up, and start reading. And the words that come to mind for me from the beginning of the book of Job, that's where I've been reading these past weeks. The thing that comes to mind for me is when God said to Satan, to the accuser of the brethren, God said, "Consider my servant Job." And God said some things about Job right then and there. In the very beginning of Job, in the first chapter, we all know who Job is. You know, you could not have read a page in this Bible and you still know about the patience of Job. I spent most of my life not reading this book in the Bible because we all know that Job was exactly what God said he was. He was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. It's repeated multiple times in the first two chapters. One, when it was just saying, "Hey, welcome to the book of Job. Here's who this guy is." Again, when God said to Satan, "Hey, I see you looking around the world, checking people out. Have you considered my servant Job? He's blameless and upright. He fears God and shuns evil." And then God, the sovereign of the universe, gave the enemy of our soul permission to give Job struggle. And the reason I've stayed away from the book of Job is because when I say struggle, I'm not just talking a little trip up here and there. The enemy was given permission to take everything Job had, but not to lay a hand on him, but to take everything that Job had. Now, I don't know about you, but you start touching my family and my friends. You start touching the people that I love, and that's akin times 10 to touching me. Worse than that. And Job's response, get this, Job's response, he worshiped God. Job fell on his face before the Lord and he worshiped him, saying, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised." And then there was more, Satan came back walking before the Lord, and the Lord said to him again, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And Satan says, yeah, I took everything he had, but let me touch him. Let me touch his flesh. Let me make him sick. And then we'll see what he thinks. And the rest of this book is poetic imagery about what Job thinks about God, what Job thinks about evil, what Job thinks about wickedness, what Job thinks about wisdom, what Job's friends think about Job. I mean, it goes on and on for 42 chapters, but the last 2 or 3 of those chapters, the Lord speaks. There's a resolution that comes, and I say to you that bad things do happen to good people. And just in the Old Testament alone, bad things happen to good people. Look at Job. Look at Noah. I don't care what kind of kindergarten stories we tell in Sunday school. Noah went through the ringer. You cannot call the flooding and destruction of the entire earth in any way a good thing when you're Noah and you're the guy who's hidden away on an ark with all these smelly animals and your terrified family under the hand of the wrath of God. And there's Job, and there's Moses, who was slated to be murdered, but his mom floats him away in a little basket. He went through some pretty nasty times. Bad things do happen to good people. What about Joseph, whose brothers sold him into slavery? Their thought was to kill him. Joseph went into slavery, and then he went into prison while in slavery. Bad things do happen to good people. Joseph was not a bad person. And then go on down the line, Daniel, who was taken captive from his home and made an eunuch, a servant of the king, in the country that took him captive. Daniel was upright. And even in that captivity, he prospered, yet he was thrown into the lion's den to be eaten alive by lions. God protected him there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had the same fate as Daniel, stolen his boys from their homeland, an act of war, prisoners of war. And they were upright, and they were trusted, and they were thrown into a fire that was so hot that the people that threw them in melted away in their own skin. And Jesus met them there. Jesus walked with them in that fire. Bad things do happen to good people. What is the bad thing? What is the lion? What is the fire that you are concerned with today? Is it sickness physically? Is it the loss of a loved one? Job dealt with some weighty issues of pain. Is it the loss of financial gain? Is it the loss of a spouse? Is it relational difficulties? Is it the search for a job that's just making you cray? Bad things do happen to good people. And we ask the question so often, why? And as you read through the book of Job, you can see that Job asks why. Did you know that bad things happened to King David, who wrote the Psalms and praised the Lord? Bad things happened to him. If you haven't read it yet and you're reading through the Bible with me this year, you're going to get to it soon, and you will see the stories upon stories that evoked and provoked the Psalms out of David's heart. God squeezed the Psalms out of David. After the birth of Jesus, he grew in favor with God and with men. He was a good person. He healed men. He taught people. And he was murdered, a sinner's death, a criminal's death on a Roman cross in a painful way. It was an execution device. It was a terroristic device that Jesus hung on for you and me. Jesus. Bad things happen to good people. But guess what? Jesus rose from the dead in victory. He came to life. Did you know that God turns what man meant for evil into good? It says so in the scripture. Did you know that God works all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose? And so therefore we can look back on Job and see the end of the story. And we know that God worked it for good. We can look back on Daniel and see that the angels shut the mouths of the lions. They didn't even touch him. We can look back and see that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were joined in the fire by Jesus, who rescued them, and the king worshiped. When the lions didn't eat Daniel, the king worshiped. When Job forgave his friends, multiplied back blessing upon his life. Do you see that God allows bad things to happen to good people to point to his glory, to point us to trusting him, to point us to coming closer to him? Because these lives that we live are not for ourselves. These lives that we live are working out in us the process of learning to trust the only one who is trustworthy. And he is trustworthy. He is the promise keeper. He is the lover of your soul. Will you turn to him today, knowing that we are not, I beg your pardon, I never promised you a rose garden along with the sunshine. There's gotta be a little rain sometimes. He never promised us. He, in fact, said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. And it's going to be a great day.